This video is the second in a three-part series looking at combining arguments. In the first video, we looked at the fine details of constructing an argument and how individual evidences that we find can be used as premises and the different ways in which we can use these to construct an argument. In this video, we're going to focus on the bigger picture, how we can start to link those individual arguments into an overall cohesive document. And the way that we describe this is that we will form a series of micro conclusions that will lead to the ultimate or mega conclusion. What we've seen so far is that we can take evidence and we can combine that to form propositions, intermediate conclusions, and they might have singular, convergent, multiple linked or coordinative structures. If this is the first video you're watching and those are not familiar terms, I would encourage you to watch the first video and then come back to this video. We've looked at how the format of the different types of structure can be used as a form of note-taking. And when it comes to writing, that note-taking can really inform our structure of the document that we are working on, particularly the discussion section. We have a simplified diagram over on the left of the screen. That really doesn't have to have the strict format that we looked in the first video, but it helps us think about how we're going to actually plan a paragraph that outlines our findings and portrays the argument that we're trying to construct. We need to be mindful of keeping a good academic standard of writing when we're planning these paragraphs. So if you're not familiar with how to achieve this, it might be worth looking at some guidance formats such as Peel, Teal, Seal, PEPA or Axes. There are many others. These are just some which I found particularly resonate with my own writing style and work well with the format of constructing arguments which I've been outlining. If you're not familiar with these, I would encourage you to go and spend some time looking at those to see if they will be helpful to you too. In terms of combining arguments, we can take what we've learned so far and use these as forms of note-taking to look at how we'll construct our overall argument. And it's important to note that as we do this, we don't have to have one consistent style of critical reasoning throughout our document. There are times when you'll be forming evidence and you'll find a whole series of evidence for different points, and you'll find that the first point perhaps there is very strong evidence where you really don't see any other conclusion that can be drawn. As you move along to the next proposition that you're looking at, the next area which you're looking to include in your overall discussion, the evidence might not be as strong, and therefore you might need to adopt a different critical reasoning style. This can influence not only the planning of how you're going to actually use these micro conclusions, but the language which you will use as you actually portray them. So for example, when you are very confident there's no other conclusion that can be drawn, then that's one distinct critical reasoning style. You can look at language like, given these premises are true, the only possible conclusion is. That's a very deductive style of portraying your argument. You may find that there is a range of evidence that's directly linked to what you're talking about but doesn't have that same strength. It is possible, although maybe unlikely, that different conclusions could be drawn, in which case you need to change the language. You would say, given the combined evidence available, the conclusion is probably. This is very inductive style of critical reasoning. Alternatively, it's possible that you can't find evidence directly related to what you're doing. Perhaps you're looking for evidence and there isn't any related to the exact profession you're looking at, and you need to look at different professions and then translate the findings to the particular population which you're looking at, in which case that's very abductive, and you would need to change the language again and say things like, given the evidence available, the most likely conclusion is. That's quite distinct from the most probable conclusion is, particularly if you're somebody that has studied probability. It may seem that that language is relatively similar, but essentially a probable conclusion is something which there is evidence that can lead a probabilistic argument, whereas the most likely is really a best guess scenario. If those distinctions are something which you're not particularly clear on, I would encourage you to look at other videos that outline differences between the inductive, deductive and abductive critical reasoning styles. Once we've identified how to combine different propositions, even when using different critical reasoning styles to identify themes, we replicate this process to identify different themes. And remember that as you're actually working through these examples, each of these propositions or intermediate conclusions And likewise, as we move up towards our combined conclusion for each theme, these are the micro conclusions. And these are like breadcrumbs to the reader. As we're going through reading a document, when people follow this structure, we're gathering all of these small conclusions and we're preempting what the ultimate conclusion will be. And that ultimate conclusion is the actual conclusion or final summary, the last bit of the actual document that you see. And people often assume that when we're writing, that's the only time we can conclude. And that is a weaker structure because it's leaving everything till the end. By ensuring we emphasize these micro conclusions as we work our way through the document, it allows the reader to get a sense of the line of thought that we're having and how we're justifying that ultimate conclusion. So the take-home messages I'd really like you to get from this video is that the overall structure of a document is influenced by both how the arguments are combined and the philosophical approach. By having an awareness of this, when you're actually planning how you'll write, before you start writing, the readability and impact of your work will be improved by having this overall structure which guides people along the thought process towards the conclusion and how you have reached it. It will give them the tools they need to assess whether or not they agree with the way you're interpreting the evidence. And by combining each micro argument into the ultimate argument, you will have what we call congruence to your work. Congruence is that linking back. Are you doing what you said you'd be doing in your research question and objectives? Does your conclusion link very clearly to that, which will also increase the impact of your writing?